Hello, and welcome back to Forgotten Ties. Every photograph tells a story. We hold them up to the light, expecting to see a moment frozen in time, a happy memory, a beautiful face, a fleeting feeling of joy. But what if the story behind the photo is a lie? What if the image, so full of innocence and light, was captured at the very moment a life was about to be plunged into unimaginable darkness? Today, we're not talking about a simple kidnapping. We're talking about a story so twisted, so profoundly sad, it almost feels like a work of fiction. But it isn't. It's the story of a girl named Clara Bellweather, whose life began with a picture and ended in a mystery that would haunt a family for 3 decades. The photograph in question, it wasn't just a random baby picture. It was a professional studio shot, a sweet-faced baby with large, curious eyes and a tuft of golden brown hair, wearing a white, lacy dress. Her parents, Robert and Evelyn Bellweather, were a picture of suburban perfection. He was a quiet, hard-working accountant. She was a homemaker who spent her days tending to their impeccable garden and volunteering at the local church. They lived in a beautiful, 2-story house with a white picket fence on Elm Street, a street so idyllic you'd expect to see a movie being filmed there. And for a brief, shining moment, their world was perfect. Clara was their miracle, born after years of struggle, a child they adored and cherished. The day this photograph was taken, Evelyn had dressed Clara in that special outfit, a family heirloom, and they had driven to the most prestigious photo studio in town. The photographer, a kind, older woman named Mrs. Peterson, spent an hour coaxing smiles and gurgles out of the 6-month-old. The final shot, the one they chose to frame and put on the mantel, was perfect. Clara was looking straight at the camera, a tiny, half-smile on her lips. It was a portrait of pure, unadulterated hope. But a few hours after that perfect portrait was taken, the hope shattered. Robert and Evelyn had stopped at a small diner on the way home to grab a quick bite. Clara was sleeping soundly in her car seat. When they returned to the car, the back door was ajar. The car seat was empty. The world fell out from under them. The police were called. A massive search was launched, but nothing. No note, no ransom demand, no witnesses. Just the empty car seat and the chilling silence. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. The story, of course, made headlines. The innocent baby, the grieving parents, the baffling lack of clues. People in the town, in the entire state, were glued to their TVs, desperate for a breakthrough. But the days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and the months into years. The photo, once a symbol of their greatest joy, became a stark reminder of their deepest sorrow. It was a public monument to their grief. The Bellweathers never fully recovered. Their perfect house on Elm Street became a mausoleum of memories. Clara's nursery remained untouched, her little pink blanket still folded neatly on the rocking chair. Evelyn, once so full of life, became a ghost in her own home, spending her days staring out the window, waiting for a little girl who would never come back. Robert threw himself into his work, his face a mask of quiet, unending agony. The local police department assigned their most tenacious detective, a man named Arthur Vance, to the case. Vance was relentless. He interviewed everyone, re-examined every piece of evidence, even those that seemed insignificant. He came back to the Bellweathers' house again and again, poring over the photo album, asking the same questions in 100 different ways, hoping to find a detail they had missed. There was something about this case that ate at him. Something about the coldness of it all. No struggle, no sign of force. Just gone. And the fact that it happened on the very day that beautiful photo was taken, a day that should have been a celebration of life, seemed to add a grotesque, ironic twist to the whole ordeal. But Vance couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, something wasn't right with the Bellweathers themselves. They were so calm. Too calm, perhaps? Their grief was palpable, yes, but there was a guardedness, a strange, quiet distance between them that didn't feel like the typical response of parents who had lost their only child. He noticed small things. Evelyn would never look him in the eye when she spoke about the baby. Robert would talk about Clara in the past tense, as if she were a historical figure, not his own flesh and blood. And the photograph, they never touched it. It sat on the mantel, pristine, almost like an exhibit. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible detail, but to a seasoned detective, it screamed volumes. The pristine nature of the photo, the way it was displayed almost like a trophy of tragedy, it just didn't sit right. He started to wonder, what were they not telling him? What was the secret hidden behind the perfect white picket fence of Elm Street? Was the perfect picture of a happy family just a clever facade, hiding a truth more terrible than a simple abduction? The answers, as Vance would soon discover, were buried deep, and they would change everything. The trail was cold, the leads had long since gone stale, but that photograph, that one haunting image, had an air of finality about it that kept him from letting go. It was a clue, not just to a child's disappearance, but to a deception that was far more sinister. Vance's gut feeling wasn't just a hunch, it was a fire in his soul. He spent weeks digging into the Bellwethers' past, looking for a crack in the perfect facade. He found nothing that screamed guilty. Robert and Evelyn had no criminal records, no history of violence, no hidden affairs. They were, by all accounts, exactly who they appeared to be. The perfect, grieving couple. But Vance knew better. The truth, he was certain, lay buried somewhere, in plain sight. He just needed to find the right shovel. That shovel came in the form of an old friend, a former colleague from the force who now worked in forensic accounting. Vance had a wild idea, a long shot, but one he couldn't ignore. He asked his friend to look into the Bellwethers' finances, not for anything criminal, but for anything unusual. And what he found was strange. Robert and Evelyn, living in a nice house, with a steady income, had no debt. But they had also stopped putting money into their savings account a few months before Clara was born. The account, which had been steadily growing for years, suddenly went stagnant. It was a minor detail, but it stood out to Vance. Why? Why would a couple preparing for a new baby, a time of immense financial strain, suddenly stop saving? It made no sense. He kept digging. He looked at their bank statements, their credit card bills, and he found something even more baffling. A series of large, cash withdrawals from a local bank branch, all made in the months leading up to Clara's birth. The total amount was staggering, enough to buy a new car, a vacation home, a small fortune. Vance knew this wasn't a smoking gun, not yet. He couldn't go to his superiors with a hunch and a few strange bank statements. He needed a story, a narrative that connected the dots. He returned to the photo studio where the last known photo of Clara was taken. Mrs. Peterson, the elderly photographer, was still there, though she was planning to retire soon. She remembered the Bellwethers, of course. How could she forget? The case had consumed the town. She remembered how sweet Clara was, how her parents doted on her. But she also remembered something else. Something she had never mentioned to the police, because she didn't think it was important. She recalled the day of the photo shoot. A woman had been waiting in her studio. A woman Mrs. Peterson had never seen before. She was tall, with striking red hair and a peculiar, nervous energy. She had been sitting there for an hour, looking at photo albums, and when Mrs. Peterson had mentioned the Bellwethers were coming in for a baby shoot, the woman had asked, "Oh, are they the ones who adopted that child?" The question had confused Mrs. Peterson. She knew Robert and Evelyn had struggled to have children, but she had always assumed Clara was their biological child. She hadn't thought anything of it at the time. Perhaps the woman had mistaken them for someone else. But now, with Vance asking, the memory came back with chilling clarity. The woman had also asked if she could pay in cash for a few old portraits she said she liked. She had handed over a wad of $100 bills, more than enough to cover the cost, and left without waiting for the change. Adoption. The word hit Vance like a thunderbolt. It connected the cash withdrawals, the financial oddities, the strange emotional distance of the Bellwethers. What if Clara wasn't their biological child? What if the perfect family was just a carefully constructed lie? Vance knew that even if they had adopted Clara, a kidnapping was still a kidnapping. But something about this new information changed the entire dynamic of the case. It added a layer of motive, a potential explanation for the strange, detached grief. If she wasn't their own flesh and blood, perhaps their sorrow was different, more performative. And what about the woman in the studio? The nervous energy, the red hair, the specific question about adoption. Was she the birth mother? Was this a desperate, heartbreaking custody battle that had gone horribly wrong? Vance followed the trail of the cash withdrawals, which led him to an anonymous P.O. box in a different state. It was a dead end. But the pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fall into place. He realized he had been looking at the wrong kind of photograph all along. He had been so focused on the one on the mantel, the one of Clara, that he had missed the bigger picture. The photograph wasn't a clue to the kidnapping, it was a clue to the Bellweathers themselves. It was an image of the life they wanted the world to see, a life they had paid for in cash and kept secret. He knew the story was more complex, more tragic, than he had ever imagined. The disappearance of Clara wasn't the beginning of the story, but the culmination of a deeper, darker narrative. And as he sat in his car outside the Bellweathers' house, looking at that perfectly manicured lawn and the white picket fence, Vance understood the full horror of what he was dealing with. The photograph wasn't a monument to a child's disappearance. It was a victory photo. A photograph taken to commemorate a transaction. A baby purchased, a life bought, a future that was never meant to be. The parents, the perfect, grieving parents, were just actors in a play, and the stage was their beautiful, suburban home. The real story, the one that had been hidden for 30 years, was about to be exposed. The truth, when it finally surfaced, was more chilling than any of Vance's theories. It wasn't a bitter birth mother or a botched custody battle. It was something far more monstrous, a crime of cold, calculated cruelty. Vance went back to the Bellweathers' house one more time. He didn't come to ask questions, he came to make a statement. He sat across from them in their pristine living room, the photograph of Clara still smiling from the mantel. He watched them carefully, their practiced masks of grief firmly in place. Then he began to speak, not about Clara's disappearance, but about a different child, a little boy named Ethan Bell. Ethan had been the Bellweathers' first child, their biological son, born 5 years before Clara. They had never mentioned him. Not once. Vance had only found his existence by pure chance, buried in a dusty old church record from a neighboring town, a record of a private burial. The record was sparse. Ethan Bellweather, born April 12, 1990. Died June 20, 1995. Cause of death undisclosed. The lack of an official death certificate was the first red flag. The second was the fact that the Bellweathers had moved to their idyllic home on Elm Street shortly after Ethan's death, selling their old house and severing all ties with their former life. It was a complete and total reset. Vance laid out the facts calmly, one by one. The quiet cemetery plot. The hurried move. The wiped clean slate. He watched as Evelyn's hands began to tremble in her lap. Robert's mask of stoicism finally began to crack. He could see the years of carefully buried secrets rising to the surface, a toxic swamp of pain and guilt. Vance told them what his sources had told him. Ethan wasn't just a child who had passed away. He had suffered from a rare genetic disorder, a debilitating illness that required constant, round-the-clock care. The Bellweathers, exhausted and overwhelmed, had struggled to cope. They were in way over their heads, financially and emotionally. The perfect family facade was crumbling even then. Then, one night, in a fit of desperation and frustration, Robert had given Ethan an overdose of medication. It was a mercy killing, he would later confess, a twisted act of love to end his son's suffering. But it was still murder. The guilt had consumed them. The loss had been devastating, but so was the constant, gnawing fear of being discovered. They packed up their lives and moved, hoping to outrun their past. But a life without a child felt empty and incomplete. They wanted to fill the void, to recapture the perfect family they had once pretended to be. So they did what the rich and powerful sometimes do. They went shopping. They found a black market for babies, a shadowy network that dealt in the most precious of commodities. They found a young woman, a runaway with no family, pregnant and desperate. They paid her a small fortune for her unborn child, a child they would name Clara. The money they had withdrawn from the bank was the down payment. The rest was paid in cash, in a series of anonymous transactions. The woman with the red hair in the photo studio, She was Clara's birth mother. The Bellwethers had arranged for her to wait at the studio as a safety measure. They wanted to see the baby one last time, to make sure the transaction was complete and that they had the real child. But the woman was racked with guilt and second thoughts. She had been paid, but the pain of giving away her child was unbearable. She had made a deal with the Bellwethers. She would take the money and disappear, never to be seen again. But the sight of Clara, so perfect and innocent in that white dress, had shattered her resolve. She followed them to the diner, intending to confront them, to beg for her baby back. But she never got the chance. The Bellwethers, seeing her follow them, were seized with panic. They knew she could ruin their perfect life, expose their terrible secret. The photograph, the symbol of their new, perfect family, was now a ticking time bomb. What happened next was a blur of desperation and terror. Robert, in a moment of sheer madness, made a decision. He had to make it look like an abduction. He slipped out of the diner, went to the car, and took the baby. He then drove to a prearranged rendezvous point where a car was waiting. The birth mother, in her frantic state, had seen him leave. She ran to the car, expecting to find her baby and hoping to stop him. But he was already gone. When Robert and Evelyn returned to their car and saw the back door ajar, they acted their parts perfectly, their grief a performance honed over years of hiding their terrible secret. But the secret was now about to be exposed. The photograph wasn't a victory photo after all. It was a moment of truth, a snapshot of the very instant their carefully constructed lie began to unravel. The final chapter of this tragedy unfolded not in a grand courtroom or in a dramatic chase, but in a small, sterile interrogation room. Robert and Evelyn, their masks of composure finally gone, sat in silence as Detective Vance presented his case. There was no defiance, no denial, just a deep, shattering weariness. The photograph of Clara, the one on the mantel, was a constant presence, a silent witness to their slow, decades-long spiral into darkness. They confessed it all, their voices hollow echoes in the quiet room. The death of Ethan, a secret they had buried with him. The desperate, cold transaction for a new child. The panic in the diner. The orchestrated abduction. The missing piece, the one that had haunted Vance for so long, was Clara herself. What happened to her after that photo was taken? After she was put in a different car, driven away from the life her parents had bought for her? Robert confessed that the woman with the red hair, Clara's birth mother, had not followed them home. She had been waiting at the photo studio. She had told them she had changed her mind, that she wanted her baby back. Robert had panicked. He knew the woman could expose them, could reveal the ugly truth about Ethan, about the secret transaction. So he made a deal with the devil. He contacted the man who had facilitated the illegal adoption, the shadowy figure who ran the black market for babies. He paid him an exorbitant fee, not to deliver a baby, but to make one disappear. The man, a cold and calculating predator, promised to get rid of the birth mother and the baby, making it look like an abduction gone wrong. He had orchestrated the entire thing, waiting at the diner for the signal. When Robert and Evelyn returned to their car and saw him, he motioned for them to get back in the diner. They did. They played their parts, making a panicked phone call to 911. The man, a ghost in the night, took Clara and the birth mother, who was also waiting in the area, and disappeared. But the truth, as always, was more complex. The birth mother, a woman named Lily, had been struggling with guilt. When the man approached her, she knew what he was. She knew he wasn't going to help her. She ran. She ran with all her might, through the cold night, into the woods, with the baby in her arms. But the man, a professional, was faster. He had caught her, but just as he was about to, a car came along. It was a farmer on his way home from working late. He saw the struggle, the woman and the man, and he honked his horn loudly. The man, spooked, let go of Lily and Clara and ran into the woods. Lily was a mess. She was terrified, bruised, and alone. But she was holding her baby. She ran to the farmer, pleading for help. The farmer, a kind old man named Silas, took them in. He listened to her story, the whole terrible, complicated mess, and he made a decision. He would help her. He would protect her. He would not tell anyone, not the police, not her parents, not anyone. He drove her to a small, remote town in another state, a place where no one knew them, and he gave her a new name. He gave her a new life. And he raised Clara as his own granddaughter, a little girl named Rose. The photograph, the one on the mantel, was a lie. A beautiful, tragic lie. But another photograph existed. A photograph taken in a tiny town in a small, dusty photo booth. It was a grainy black and white image of a young woman with tired but determined eyes, holding a sleeping baby with a tuft of golden brown hair. This photograph was taken the day she was taken away. Not by a kidnapper, not by a criminal, but by a mother who was fighting for her child. For 30 years, Clara, now a woman named Rose, had lived a simple life, believing she was the granddaughter of a quiet old farmer. She never knew the truth, never knew the world had been looking for her. But Detective Vance, haunted by the case, had never given up. He had spent years tracking down the man who ran the black market for babies, a trail that led him to an old, frail man in a prison hospital. The man, on his deathbed, finally confessed. He told Vance about Lily, about the farmer, about the little girl who was now a woman. He gave Vance an address that would finally lead to a resolution, to a family finding a daughter they had never known. The Bellweathers went to prison. Robert for murder, Evelyn for aiding and abetting. They died there, alone and forgotten, consumed by their guilt. Lily and Clara, now Rose, were finally reunited with their true family. Rose, when she found out the truth, was shocked, but also grateful. She had been raised with love, not with the cold, calculated perfection of the Bellweathers. The photo on the mantel, the one that had haunted a town for 30 years, was finally taken down. The new photo, the one from the dusty photo booth, was put in its place, a testament to a mother's love and a little girl's will to survive. It wasn't perfect. It was blurry and the lighting was bad. But it was real. And sometimes, in the darkest of stories, that's all that matters. And with that, we close the book on a case that defined a generation. But the questions linger, don't they? How far would you go to protect a lie? And how much could a single photograph really tell you about the story it's hiding? The answers, as we've seen, can be as beautiful as they are heartbreaking. If this story resonated with you, and you want to hear more tales of buried secrets and unbelievable truths, please consider liking this video, subscribing to Forgotten Ties, and hitting that notification bell so you don't miss our next episode. Until then, stay safe and remember, look a little closer at the pictures you hold dear. You never know what they might be hiding.